The house, the only one in the entire valley, sat on the crest of a low hill. From this height one could see the river and the field of ripe corn dotted with the flowers that always promised a good harvest. The only thing the earth needed was a downpour or at least a shower. Throughout the morning Lencho, who knew his fields intimately, had done nothing else but see the sky towards the northeast. "Now we're really going to get some water, woman." The woman who was preparing supper replied, "Yes, God willing." The older boys were working in the field, while the smaller ones were playing near the house until the woman called to them all, "Come for dinner." It was during the meal that, just as Lencho had predicted, big drops of rain began to fall. In the northeast, huge mountains of clouds could be seen approaching. The air was fresh and sweet. The man went out for no other reason than to have the pleasure of feeling the rain on his body, and when he returned he exclaimed, "These aren't raindrops falling from the sky, they are new coins. The big drops are 10-cent pieces and the little ones are 5s. With a satisfied expression he regarded the field of ripe corn with its flowers, draped in a curtain of rain. But suddenly a strong wind began to blow and along with the rain very large hailstones began to fall. These truly did resemble new silver coins. The boys, exposing themselves to the rain, ran out to collect the frozen pearls. "It's really getting bad now," exclaimed the man. "I hope it passes quickly." It did not pass quickly. For an hour the hail rained on the house, the garden, the hillside, the cornfield, on the whole valley. The field was white, as if covered with salt. Not a leaf remained on the trees. The corn was totally destroyed. The flowers were gone from the plants. Lencho's soul was filled with sadness. When the storm had passed, he stood in the middle of the field and said to his sons, "A plague of locusts would have left more than this. The hail has left nothing. This year we will have no corn." That night was a sorrowful one. "All our work, for nothing. There's no one who can help us. We'll all go hungry this year." But in the hearts of all who lived in that solitary house in the middle of the valley, there was a single hope: help from God. Don't be so upset, even though this seems like a total loss. Remember, no one dies of hunger. That's what they say. No one dies of hunger. All through the night, Lencho thought only of his one hope: the help of God, whose eyes, as he had been instructed, see everything, even what is deep in one's conscience. Lencho was an ox of a man, working like an animal in the fields, but still he knew how to write. The following Sunday, at daybreak, he began to write a letter which he himself would carry to town and place in the mail. It was nothing less than a letter to God. "God," he wrote, "if you don't help me, my family and I will go hungry this year. I need 100 pesos in order to sow my field again and to live until the crop comes, because the hailstorm." He wrote, "To God," on the envelope, put the letter inside and, still troubled, went to town. At the post office, he placed a stamp on the letter and dropped it into the mailbox. One of the employees, who was a postman and also helped at the post office, went to his boss laughing heartily and showed him the letter to God. Never in his career as a postman had he known that address. The postmaster, a fat, amiable fellow, also broke out laughing, but almost immediately he turned serious and, tapping the letter on his desk, commented, "What faith! I wish I had the faith of the man who wrote this letter." Starting up a correspondence with God. So, in order not to shake the writer's faith in God, the postmaster came up with an idea: answer the letter. But when he opened it, it was evident that to answer it he needed something more than goodwill, ink and paper. But he stuck to his resolution. He asked for money from his employees, he himself gave part of his salary, and several friends of his were obliged to give something, for an act of charity. It was impossible for him to gather together the 100 pesos, so he was able to send the farmer only a little more than half. He put the money in an envelope addressed to Lencho and with it a letter containing only a single word as a signature: God. The following Sunday Lencho came a bit earlier than usual to ask if there was a letter for him. It was the postman himself who handed the letter to him, while the postmaster, experiencing the contentment of a man who has performed a good deed, looked on from his office. Lencho showed not the slightest surprise on seeing the money. Such was his confidence, but he became angry when he counted the money. God could not have made a mistake, nor could he have denied Lencho what he had requested. Immediately, Lencho went up to the window to ask for paper and ink. On the public writing table, he started to write, with much wrinkling of his brow, caused by the effort he had to make to express his ideas. When he finished, he went to the window to buy a stamp which he licked and then affixed to the envelope with a blow of his fist. The moment the letter fell into the mailbox, the postmaster went to open it. It said, "God, of the money that I asked for, only 70 pesos reached me. Send me the rest, since I need it very much. But don't send it to me through the mail because the post office employees are a bunch of
10th May dawned bright and clear. For the past few days I have been pleasantly besieged by dignitaries and world leaders who were coming to pay their respects before the inauguration. Victoria. For decades this had been the seat of white supremacy, and now it was the site of a rainbow gathering of different colors and nations for the installation of South Africa's first democratic, non-racial government. On that lovely autumn day I was accompanied by my daughter Zenani. On the podium, Mr. de Klerk was first sworn in as second deputy president. Then Thabo Mbeki was sworn in as first deputy president. When it was my turn, I pledged to obey and uphold the Constitution and to devote myself to the well-being of the Republic and its people. To the assembled guests and the watching world, I said, "Today, all of us do, by our presence here, confer glory and hope to newborn liberty. Out of the experience of an extraordinary human disaster that lasted too long, must be born a society of which all humanity will be proud. We, who were outlaws not so long ago, have today been given the rare privilege to be host to the nations of the world on our own soil. We thank all of our distinguished international guests for having come to take possession with the people of our country of what is, after all, a common victory for justice, for peace, for human dignity. We have, at last, achieved our political emancipation. We pledge ourselves to liberate all our people from the continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender and other discrimination. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement. Let freedom reign. God bless Africa." A few moments later we all lifted our eyes in awe as a spectacular array of South African jets, helicopters and troop carriers roared in perfect formation over the Union buildings. It was not only a display of pinpoint precision and military force, but a demonstration of the military's loyalty to democracy, to a new government that had been freely and fairly elected. Only moments before, the highest generals of the South African Defence Force and Police, their chests bedecked with ribbons and medals from days gone by, saluted me and pledged their loyalty. I was not unmindful of the fact that not so many years before they would not have saluted but arrested me. Finally a chevron of Impala jets left a smoke trail of the black, red, green, blue and gold of the new South African flag. The day was symbolized for me by the playing of our two national anthems, and the vision of whites singing Kosi Sikelel I Africa, and blacks singing Die Stem, the old anthem of the Republic. Although that day neither group knew the lyrics of the anthem they once despised, they would soon know the words by heart. On the day of the inauguration, I was overwhelmed with a sense of history. In the first decade of the 20th century, a few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War and before my own birth, the white-skinned peoples of South Africa patched up their differences and erected a system of racial domination against the dark-skinned peoples of their own land. The structure they created formed the basis of one of the harshest, most inhumane, societies the world has ever known. Now, in the last decade of the 20th century, and my own 8th decade as a man, that system had been overturned forever and replaced by one that recognized the rights and freedoms of all peoples, regardless of the color of their skin. That day had come about through the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of my people, people whose suffering and courage can never be counted or repaid. I felt that day, as I have on so many other days, that I was simply the sum of all those African patriots who had gone before me. That long and noble line ended and now began again with me. I was pained that I was not able to thank them and that they were not able to see what their sacrifices had wrought. The policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country and my people. All of us will spend many years, if not generations, recovering from that profound hurt. But the decades of oppression and brutality had another, unintended, effect, and that was that it produced the Oliver Tambos, the Walter Sisilus, the Chief Lafulis, the Yusuf Dadus, the Bram Fishers, the Robert Sobukwe of our time, men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom and generosity that their like may never be known again. Perhaps it requires such depths of oppression to create such heights of character. My country is rich in the minerals and gems that lie beneath its soil, but I have always known that its greatest wealth is its people, finer and truer than the purest diamonds. It is from these comrades in the struggle that I learned the meaning of courage. Time and again, I have seen men and women risk and give their lives for an idea. I have seen men stand up to attacks and torture without breaking, showing a strength and resilience that defies the imagination. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Even in the grimmest times in prison, when my comrades and I were pushed to our limits, I would see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards, perhaps just for a second, but it was enough to reassure me and keep me going. Man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. In life, every man has twin obligations to his family, to his parents, to his wife and children, and he has an obligation to his people, his community, his country. In a civil and humane society, each man is able to fulfill those obligations according to his own inclinations and abilities. But in a country like South Africa, it was almost impossible for a man of my birth and color to fulfill both of those obligations. In South Africa, a man of color who attempted to live as a human being was punished and isolated. In South Africa, a man who tried to fulfill his duty to his people was inevitably ripped from his family and his home and was forced to live a life apart, a twilight existence of secrecy and rebellion. I did not in the beginning choose to place my people above my family, but in attempting to serve my people, I found that I was prevented from fulfilling my obligations as a son, a brother, a father and a husband. I was not born with a hunger to be free. I was born free, free in every way that I could know. Free to run in the fields near my mother's hut, free to swim in the clear stream that ran through my village, free to roast mealies under the stars and ride the broad backs of slow-moving bulls. As long as I obeyed my father and abided by the customs of my tribe, I was not troubled by the laws of man or God. It was only when I began to learn that my boyhood freedom was an illusion, when I discovered as a young man that my freedom had already been taken from me, that I began to hunger for it. At first, as a student, I wanted freedom only for myself, the transitory freedoms of being able to stay out at night, read what I pleased and go where I chose. Later, as a young man in Johannesburg, I yearned for the basic and honorable freedoms of achieving my potential, of earning my keep, of marrying and having a family, the freedom not to be obstructed in a lawful life. But then I slowly saw that not only was I not free, but my brothers and sisters were not free. I saw that it was not just my freedom that was curtailed, but the freedom of everyone who looked like I did. That is when I joined the African National Congress, and that is when the hunger for my own freedom became the greater hunger for the freedom of my people. It was this desire for the freedom of my people to live their lives with dignity and self-respect that animated my life, that transformed a frightened young man into a bold one, that drove a law-abiding attorney to become a criminal, that turned a family-loving husband into a man without a home, that forced a life-loving man to live like a monk. I am no more virtuous or self-sacrificing than the next man, but I found that I could not even enjoy the poor and limited freedoms I was allowed when I knew my people were not free. Freedom is indivisible. The chains on any one of my people were the chains on all of them, the chains on all of my people were the chains on me. I knew that the oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed. A man who takes away another man's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. He is locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow-mindedness. Part 1. His first flight, the young seagull was alone on his ledge. I with them. Somehow when he had taken a little run forward to the brink of the ledge and attempted to flap his wings, he became afraid. The great expanse of sea stretched down beneath, and it was such a long way down, miles down. He felt certain that his wings would never support him, so he bent his head and ran away back to the little hole under the ledge where he slept at night. Even when each of his brothers and his little sister, whose wings were far shorter than his own, ran to the brink, flapped their wings, and flew away, he failed to muster up courage to take that plunge which appeared to him so desperate. His father and mother had come around calling to him shrilly, upbraiding him, threatening to let him starve on his ledge unless he flew away. But for the life of him he could not move. That was 24 hours ago. Since then nobody had come near him. The day before, all day long, he had watched his parents flying about with his brothers and sister, perfecting them in the art of flight, teaching them how to skim the waves and how to dive for fish. He had, in fact, seen his older brother catch his first herring and devour it, standing on a rock, while his parents circled around raising a proud cackle. And all the morning the whole family had walked about on the big plateau midway down the opposite cliff, taunting him with his cowardice. The sun was now ascending the sky, blazing on his ledge that faced the south. He felt the heat because he had not eaten since the previous nightfall. He stepped slowly out to the brink of the ledge, and standing on one leg with the other leg hidden under his wing, he closed one eye, then the other, and pretended to be falling asleep. Still they took no notice of him. He saw his two brothers and his sister lying on the plateau dozing with their heads sunk into their necks. His father was preening the feathers on his white back. Only his mother was looking at him. She was standing on a little high hump on the plateau, her white breast thrust forward. Now and again, she tore at a piece of fish that lay at her feet and then scraped each side of her beak on the rock. The sight of the food maddened him. How he loved to tear food that way, scrapping his beak now and again to wet it. "Gar, gar, gar," he cried, begging her to bring him some food. "Gaw kol ah," she screamed back derisively. But he kept calling plaintively, and after a minute or so he uttered a joyful scream. His mother had picked up a piece of the fish and was flying across to him with it. He leaned out eagerly, tapping the rock with his feet, trying to get nearer to her as she flew across. But when she was just opposite to him, she halted, her wings motionless, the piece of fish in her beak almost within reach of his beak. He waited a moment in surprise, wondering why she did not come nearer, and then, maddened by hunger, he dived at the fish. With a loud scream he fell outwards and downwards into space. Then a monstrous terror seized him and his heart stood still. He could hear nothing. But it only lasted a minute. The next moment he felt his wings spread outwards. The wind rushed against his breast feathers, then under his stomach, and against his wings. He could feel the tips of his wings cutting through the air. He was not falling headlong now. He was soaring gradually downwards and outwards. He was no longer afraid. He just felt a bit dizzy. Then he flapped his wings once and he soared upwards. Gar, 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 gaw kolar. His mother swooped past him, her wings making a loud noise. He answered her with another scream. Then his father flew over him screaming. He saw his two brothers and his sister flying around him, curveting and banking and soaring and diving. Then he completely forgot that he had not always been able to fly, and commended himself to dive and soar and curve, shrieking shrilly. He was near the sea now, flying straight over it, facing straight out over the ocean. He saw a vast green sea beneath him, with little ridges moving over it, and he turned his beak sideways and cawed amusedly. His parents and his brothers and sister had landed on this green flooring ahead of him. They were beckoning to him, calling shrilly. He dropped his legs to stand on the green sea. His legs sank into it. He screamed with fright and attempted to rise again, flapping his wings. But he was tired and weak with hunger and he could not rise, exhausted by the strange exercise. His feet sank into the green sea, and then his belly touched it and he sank no farther. He was floating on it, and around him his family was screaming, praising him, and their beaks were offering him scraps of dogfish. He had made his first flight. Part 2. The black aeroplane. The moon was coming up in the east, behind me, and stars were shining in the clear sky above me. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. I was happy to be alone high up above the sleeping countryside. I was flying my old Dakota aeroplane over France back to England. I was dreaming of my holiday and looking forward to being with my family. I looked at my watch, 1:30 in the morning. I should call Paris Control soon, I thought. As I looked down past the nose of the aeroplane, I saw the lights of a big city in front of me. I switched on the radio and said, "Paris Control, Dakota DSO88 here. Can you hear me? I'm on my way to England. Over." The voice from the radio answered me immediately. "DSO88, I can hear you. You ought to turn 12 degrees west now, DSO88. Over." I checked the map and the compass, switched over to my second and last fuel tank, and turned the Dakota 12 degrees west towards England. I'll be in time for breakfast, I thought. A good big English breakfast. Everything was going well. It was an easy flight. Paris was about 150 kilometers behind me when I saw the clouds. Storm clouds. They were huge. They looked like black mountains standing in front of me across the sky. I knew I could not fly up and over them, and I did not have enough fuel to fly around them to the north or south. I ought to go back to Paris, I thought, but I wanted to get home. I wanted that breakfast. I'll take the risk, I thought, and flew the old Dakota straight into the storm. Inside the clouds, everything was suddenly black. It was impossible to see anything outside the aeroplane. The old aeroplane jumped and twisted in the air. I looked at the compass. I couldn't believe my eyes. The compass was turning round and round and round. It was dead. It would not work. The other instruments were suddenly dead, too. I tried the radio. Paris Control, can you hear me? There was no answer. The radio was dead too. I had no radio, no compass, and I could not see where I was. I was lost in the storm. Then, in the black clouds quite near me, I saw another aeroplane. It had no lights on its wings, but I could see it flying next to me through the storm. I could see the pilot's face, turned towards me. I was very glad to see another person. He lifted one hand and waved. "Follow me," he was saying. "Follow me. He knows that I am lost," I thought. "He's trying to help me." He turned his aeroplane slowly to the north, in front of my Dakota, so that it would be easier for me to follow him. I was very happy to go behind the strange aeroplane like an obedient child. After half an hour, the strange black aeroplane was still there in front of me in the clouds. Now there was only enough fuel in the old Dakota's last tank to fly for 5 or 10 minutes more. I was starting to feel frightened again. But then he started to go down and I followed through the storm. Suddenly I came out of the clouds and saw 2 long straight lines of lights in front of me. It was a runway. An airport. I was safe. I turned to look for my friend in the black aeroplane, but the sky was empty. There was nothing there. The black aeroplane was gone. I could not see it anywhere. I landed and was not sorry to walk away from the old Dakota near the control tower. I went and asked a woman in the control center where I was and who the other pilot was. I wanted to say, "Thank you." She looked at me very strangely, and then laughed. "Another aeroplane, up there in this storm. No other aeroplanes were flying tonight. Yours was the only one I could see on the radar. So who helped me to arrive there safely without a compass or a radio, and without any..." Writing in a diary is a really strange experience for someone like me. Not only because I've never written anything before, but also because it seems to me that later on neither I nor anyone else will be interested in the musings of a 13-year-old schoolgirl. Oh well, it doesn't matter. I feel like writing, and I have an even greater need to get all kinds of things off my chest. Paper has more patience than people. I thought of this saying on one of those days when I was feeling a little depressed and was sitting at home with my chin in my hands, bored and listless, wondering whether to stay in or go out. I finally stayed where I was, brooding. Yes, paper does have more patience, and since I'm not planning to let anyone else read this stiff-backed notebook grandly referred to as a diary, unless I should ever find a real friend, it probably won't make a bit of difference. Now I'm back to the point that prompted me to keep a diary in the first place. I don't have a friend. Let me put it more clearly, since no one will believe that a 13-year-old girl is completely alone in the world. And I'm not. I have loving parents and a 16-year-old sister, and there are about 30 people I can call friends. I have a family, loving aunts and a good home. No, on the surface I seem to have everything, except my one true friend. All I think about when I'm with friends is having a good time. I can't bring myself to talk about anything but ordinary everyday things. We don't seem to be able to get any closer, and that's the problem. Maybe it's my fault that we don't confide in each other. In any case, that's just how things are, and unfortunately they're not liable to change. This is why I've started the diary. To enhance the image of this long-awaited friend in my imagination, I don't want to jot down the facts in this diary the way most people would do, but I want the diary to be my friend, and I'm going to call this friend, Kitty. Since no one would understand a word of my stories to Kitty if I were to plunge right in, I'd better provide a brief sketch of my life, much as I dislike doing so. My father, the most adorable father I've ever seen, didn't marry my mother until he was 36 and she was 25. My sister, Margot, was born in Frankfurt in Germany in 1926. I was born on the 12th of June 1929. I lived in Frankfurt until I was 4. My father emigrated to Holland in 1933. My mother, Edith Hollander Frank, went with him to Holland in September, while Margot and I were sent to Aachen to stay with our grandmother. Margot went to Holland in December, and I followed in February, when I was plunked down on the table as a birthday present for Margot. I started right away at the Montessori nursery school. I stayed there until I was 6, at which time I started in the first form. In the 6th form my teacher was Mrs. Cooperis, the headmistress. At the end of the year we were both in tears as we said a heartbreaking farewell. In the summer of 1941 Grandma fell ill and had to have an operation, so my birthday passed with little celebration. Grandma died in January 1942. No one knows how often I think of her and still love her. This birthday celebration in 1942 was intended to make up for the other, and Grandma's candle was lit along with the rest. The 4 of us are still doing well, and that brings me to the present date of the 20th of June 1942, and the solemn dedication of my diary. Dearest Kitty, our entire class is quaking in its boots. The reason, of course, is the forthcoming meeting in which the teachers decide who'll move up to the next form and who'll be kept back. Half the class is making bets. GN and I laugh ourselves silly at the 2 boys behind us, CN and Jacques, who have staked their entire holiday savings on their bet. From morning to night, it's, you're going to pass, no, I'm not, yes, you are, no, I'm not. Even G's pleading glances and my angry outbursts can't calm them down. If you ask me, there are so many dummies that about a quarter of the class should be kept back, but teachers are the most unpredictable creatures on earth. I'm not so worried about my girlfriends and myself. We'll make it. The only subject I'm not sure about is maths. Anyway, all we can do is wait. Until then, we keep telling each other not to lose heart. I get along pretty well with all my teachers. There are 9 of them, 7 men and 2 women. Mr. Keesing, the old fogey who teaches maths, was annoyed with me for ages because I talked so much. After several warnings, he assigned me extra homework. An essay on the subject, a chatterbox. A chatterbox? What can you write about that? I'd worry about that later, I decided. I jotted down the title in my notebook, tucked it in my bag and tried to keep quiet. That evening, after I'd finished the rest of my homework, the note about the essay caught my eye. I began thinking about the subject while chewing the tip of my fountain pen. Anyone could ramble on and leave big spaces between the words, but the trick was to come up with convincing arguments to prove the necessity of talking. I thought, and suddenly I had an idea. I wrote the 3 pages Mr. Keesing had assigned me and was satisfied. I argued that talking is a student's trait and that I would do my best to keep it under control, but that I would never be able to cure myself of the habit since my mother talked as much as I did if not more, and that there's not much you can do about inherited traits. Mr. Keesing had a good laugh at my arguments, but when I proceeded to talk my way through the next lesson, he assigned me a second essay. This time it was supposed to be on an incorrigible chatterbox. I handed it in, and Mr. Keesing had nothing to complain about for 2 whole lessons. However, during the 3rd lesson he'd finally had enough. Anne Frank, as punishment for talking in class, write an essay entitled, "Quack, Quack, Quack," said Mistress Chatterbox. The class roared. I had to laugh too, though I'd nearly exhausted my ingenuity on the topic of chatterboxes. It was time to come up with something else, something original. My friend, Sana, who's good at poetry, offered to help me write the essay from beginning to end in verse, and I jumped for joy. Mr. Keesing was trying to play a joke on me with this ridiculous subject, but I'd make sure the joke was on him. I finished my poem, and it was beautiful. It was about a mother duck and a father swan with 3 baby ducklings who were bitten to death by the father because they quacked too much. Luckily, Mr. Keesing took the joke the right way. He read the poem to the class, adding his own comments, and to several other classes as well. Since then I've been allowed to talk and haven't been assigned any extra homework. On the contrary, Mr. Keesing's always making jokes these days. Our elders are often heard reminiscing nostalgically about those good old Portuguese days, the Portuguese and their famous loaves of bread. Those old baker's bamboo, heralding his arrival in the morning, can still be heard in some places. Maybe the father is not alive, but the son still carries on the family profession. These bakers are, even today, known as paida in Goa. During our childhood in Goa, the baker used to be our friend, companion and guide. He used to come at least twice a day. Once, when he set out in the morning on his selling round, and then again, when he returned after emptying his huge basket. The jingling thud of his bamboo woke us up from sleep, and we ran to meet and greet him. Why was it so? Was it for the love of the loaf? Not at all. The loaves were bought by some Pascan or Bastine, the maid-servant of the house. What we longed for were those bread bangles which we chose carefully. Sometimes it was sweet bread of special make. The baker made his musical entry on the scene with the jhang sound of his specially made bamboo staff. One hand supported the basket on his head and the other banged the bamboo on the ground. He would greet the lady of the house with "Good morning," and then place his basket on the vertical bamboo. We kids would be pushed aside with a mild rebuke, and the loaves would be delivered to the servant. But we would not give up. We would climb a bench or the parapet and peep into the basket, somehow. I can still recall the typical fragrance of those loaves. Loaves for the elders and the bangles for the children. Then we did not even care to brush our teeth or wash our mouths properly. And why should we? Who would take the trouble of plucking the mango leaf for the toothbrush? And why was it necessary at all? The tiger never brushed his teeth. Hot tea could wash and clean up everything so nicely, after all. Marriage gifts are meaningless without the sweet bread known as the bowl, just as a party or a feast loses its charm without bread. Not enough can be said to show how important a baker can be for a village. The lady of the house must prepare sandwiches on the occasion of her daughter's engagement. Cakes and bolognas are a must for Christmas as well as other festivals. Thus, the presence of the baker's furnace in the village is absolutely essential. The baker or bread seller of those days had a peculiar dress known as the cabai. It was a single-piece long frock reaching down to the knees. In our childhood we saw bakers wearing a shirt and trousers which were shorter than full-length ones and longer than half pants. Even today, anyone who wears a half pant which reaches just below the knees invites the comment that he is dressed like a paida. The baker usually collected his bills at the end of the month. Monthly accounts used to be recorded on some wall in pencil. Baking was indeed a profitable profession in the old days. The baker and his family never starved. His family and his servants always looked happy and prosperous. Midway between Mysore and the coastal town of Mangalore sits a piece of heaven that must have drifted from the kingdom of God. This land of rolling hills is inhabited by a proud race of martial men, beautiful women and wild creatures. Coorg, or Kodagu, the smallest district of Karnataka, is home to evergreen rainforests, spices and coffee plantations. Evergreen rainforests cover 30% of this district. During the monsoons, it pours enough to keep many visitors away. The season of joy commences from September and continues till March. The weather is perfect, with some showers thrown in for good measure. The air breathes of invigorating coffee. Coffee estates and colonial bungalows stand tucked under tree canopies in prime corners. Carry firearms without a license. The river, Kaveri, obtains its water from the hills and forests of Coorg. Mahasir, a large freshwater fish, abound in these waters. Kingfishers dive for their catch, while squirrels and langurs drop partially eaten fruit for the mischief of enjoying the splash and the ripple effect in the clear water. Elephants enjoy being bathed and scrubbed in the river by their mahouts. The most laid-back individuals become converts to the life of high-energy adventure with river rafting, canoeing, rappelling, rock climbing and Chai Garam, Garam Chai, a vendor called out in a high-pitched voice. He came up to their window and asked, "Chai, Saab. Do you know that over 80 crore cups of tea are drunk every day throughout the world?" Rajveer said. "Phew," exclaimed Pranjal. "Tea really is very popular." The train pulled out of the station. Pranjal buried his nose in his detective book again. Rajveer too was an ardent fan of detective stories, but at the moment he was keener on looking at the beautiful scenery. It was green, green everywhere. Rajveer had never seen so much greenery before. Then the soft green paddy fields gave way to tea bushes. It was a magnificent view. Against the backdrop of densely wooded hills, a sea of tea bushes stretched as far as the eye could see. Dwarfing the tiny tea plants were tall sturdy shade trees, and amidst the orderly rows of bushes busily moved doll-like figures. In the distance was an ugly building with smoke billowing out of tall chimneys. "Hey, a tea garden!" Rajveer cried excitedly. Pranjal, who had been born and brought up on a plantation, didn't share Rajveer's excitement. "Oh, this is tea country now," he said. "Assam has the largest concentration of plantations in the world. You will see enough gardens to last you a lifetime." "I have been reading as much as I could about tea," Rajveer said. "No one really knows who discovered tea, but there are many legends." "What legends?" "Well, there's the one about the Chinese emperor who always boiled water before drinking it. One day a few leaves of the twigs burning under the pot fell into the water, giving it a delicious flavor. It is said they were tea leaves." "Tell me another," scoffed Pranjal. "We have an Indian legend too. Bodhidharma, an ancient Buddhist ascetic, cut off his eyelids because he felt sleepy during meditations. 10 tea plants grew out of the eyelids. The leaves of these plants, when put in hot water and drunk, banished sleep. Tea was first drunk in China," Rajveer added, "as far back as 2700 BC. In fact, words such as tea, chai, and chini are from Chinese. Tea came to Europe only in the 16th century and was drunk more as medicine than as beverage." The train clattered into Mariani Junction. The boys collected their luggage and pushed their way to the crowded platform. Pranjal's parents were waiting for them. Soon they were driving towards Dakayabari, the tea garden managed by Pranjal's father. An hour later the car veered sharply off the main road. They crossed a cattle bridge and entered Dakayabari Tea Estate. On both sides of the gravel road were acre upon acre of tea bushes, all neatly pruned to the same height. Groups of tea pluckers, with bamboo baskets on their backs, wearing plastic aprons, were plucking the newly sprouted leaves. Pranjal's father slowed down to allow a tractor, pulling a trailer load of tea leaves, to pass. "This is the second flush or sprouting period, isn't it, Mr. Barua?" Rajveer asked. "It lasts from May to July and yields the best tea. You seem to have done your homework before coming." Part 1. Early in the new year of 1956 I traveled to southern Iraq. By then it had crossed my mind that I should like to keep an otter instead of a dog, and that Camusferna, ringed by water a stone's throw from its door, would be an eminently suitable spot for this experiment. When I casually mentioned this to a friend, he as casually replied that I had better get one in the Tigris marshes, for there they were as common as mosquitoes, and were often tamed by the Arabs. We were going to Basra to the Consulate General to collect and answer our mail from Europe. At the Consulate General we found that my friend's mail had arrived but that mine had not. I cabled to England, and when, 3 days later, nothing had happened, I tried to telephone. The call had to be booked 24 hours in advance. On the first day the line was out of order. On the second the exchange was closed for a religious holiday. On the third day there was another breakdown. My friend left, and I arranged to meet him in a week's time. 5 days later, my mail arrived. I carried it to my bedroom to read, and there, squatting on the floor, were 2 Arabs. Beside them lay a sack that squirmed from time to time. They handed me a note from my friend. "Here is your otter. Part 2. With the opening of that sack began a phase of my life that has not yet ended, and may, for all I know, not end before I do. It is, in effect, a thraldom to otters, an otter fixation, that I have since found to be shared by most other people who have ever owned one. The creature that emerged from this sack onto the spacious tiled floor of the consulate bedroom resembled most of all a very small, medievally conceived, dragon. From the head to the tip of the tail he was coated with symmetrical pointed scales of mud armor, between whose tips was visible a soft velvet fur like that of a chocolate brown mole. He shook himself, and I half expected a cloud of dust, but in fact it was not for another month that I managed to remove the last of the mud and see the otter, as it were, in his true colors. Mijbil, as I called the otter, was, in fact, of a race previously unknown to science, and was at length christened by zoologists Lutrogale perspicillata maxwelli, or Maxwell's otter. For the first 24 hours Mijbil was neither hostile nor friendly. He was simply aloof and indifferent, choosing to sleep on the floor as far from my bed as possible. The second night Mijbil came onto my bed in the small hours and remained asleep in the crook of my knees until the servant brought tea in the morning, and during the day he began to lose his apathy and take a keen, much too keen, interest in his surroundings. I made a body belt for him and took him on a lead to the bathroom, where for half an hour he went wild with joy in the water, plunging and rolling in it, shooting up and down the length of the bathtub underwater, and making enough slosh and splash for a hippo. This, I was to learn, is a characteristic of otters. Every drop of water must be, so to speak, extended and spread about the place. A bowl must at once be overturned, or, if it will not be overturned, be sat in and splashed in until it overflows. Water must be kept on the move and made to do things. When static it is wasted and provoking. 2 days later, Mijbil escaped from my bedroom as I entered it, and I turned to see his tail disappearing round the bend of the corridor that led to the bathroom. By the time I got there he was up on the end of the bathtub and fumbling at the chromium taps with his paws. I watched, amazed. In less than a minute he had turned the tap far enough to produce a trickle of water, and after a moment or two achieved the full flow. He had been lucky to turn the tap the right way. On later occasions he would sometimes screw it up still tighter, chittering with irritation and disappointment at the tap's failure to cooperate. Very soon me would follow me without a lead and come to me when I called his name. He spent most of his time in play. He spent hours shuffling a rubber ball round the room like a 4-footed soccer player, using all 4 feet to dribble the ball, and he could also throw it, with a powerful flick of the neck, to a surprising height and distance. But the real play of an otter is when he lies on his back and juggles with small objects between his paws. Marbles were me's favorite toys for this pastime. He would lie on his back rolling 2 or more of them up and down his wide, flat belly without ever dropping one to the floor. Part 3. The days passed peacefully at Basra, but I dreaded the prospect of transporting me to England, and to Camusferna. The British airline to London would not fly animals, so I booked a flight to Paris on another airline, and from there to London. The airline insisted that me should be packed into a box not more than 18 inches square, to be carried on the floor at my feet. I had a box made, and an hour before we started, I put me into the box so that he would become accustomed to it, and left for a hurried meal. When I returned, there was an appalling spectacle. There was complete silence from the box, but from its air holes and chinks around the lid, blood had trickled and dried. I whipped off the lock and tore open the lid, and me, exhausted and blood-spattered, whimpered and caught at my leg. He had torn the lining of the box to shreds. When I removed the last of it so that there were no cutting edges left, it was just 10 minutes until the time of the flight, and the airport was 5 miles distant. I put the miserable me back into the box, holding down the lid with my hand. I sat in the back of the car with the box beside me as the driver tore through the streets of Basra like a ricocheting bullet. The aircraft was waiting to take off. I was rushed through to it by infuriated officials. Luckily, the seat booked for me was at the extreme front. I covered the floor around my feet with newspapers, rang for the air hostess, and gave her a parcel of fish, for me, to keep in a cool place. I took her into my confidence about the events of the last half hour. I have retained the most profound admiration for that air hostess. She was the very queen of her kind. She suggested that I might prefer to have my pet on my knee, and I could have kissed her hand in the depth of my gratitude. But, not knowing otters, I was quite unprepared for what followed me was out of the box in a flash. He disappeared at high speed down the aircraft. There were squawks and shrieks, and a woman stood up on her seat screaming out, "A rat! A rat!" I caught sight of Mi's tail disappearing beneath the legs of a portly white turbaned Indian. Diving for it, I missed, but found my face covered in curry. "Perhaps," said the air hostess with the most charming smile, "it would be better if you resumed your seat, and I will find the animal and bring it to you." I returned to my seat. I was craning my neck trying to follow the hunt when suddenly I heard from my feet a distressed chitter of recognition and welcome, and Mi bounded onto my knee and began to nuzzle my face and my neck. Part 4. Mi and I remained in London for nearly a month. He would play for hours with a selection of toys, ping-pong balls, marbles, rubber fruit, and a terrapin shell that I had brought back from his native marshes. With the ping-pong ball he invented a game of his own which could keep him engrossed for up to half an hour at a time. A suitcase that I had taken to Iraq had become damaged on the journey home, so that the lid, when closed, remained at a slope from one end to the other. Mi discovered that if he placed the ball on the high end it would run down the length of the suitcase. He would dash around to the other end to ambush its arrival, hide from it, crouching, to spring up and take it by surprise, grab it and trot off with it to the high end once more. Outside the house I exercised him on a lead, precisely as if he had been a dog. Mi quickly developed certain compulsive habits on these walks in the London streets, like the rituals of children who on their way to and from school must place their feet squarely on the center of each paving block, must touch every seventh upright of the iron railings, or pass to the outside of every second lamppost. Opposite to my flat was a single-storied primary school, along whose frontage ran a low wall some 2 feet high. On his way home, but never on his way out, Mi would tug me to this wall, jump onto it, and gallop the full length of its 30 yards, to the hopeless distraction both of pupils and of staff within. It is not, I suppose, in any way strange that the average Londoner should not recognize an otter, but the variety of guesses as to what kind of animal this might be came as a surprise to me. Otters belong to a comparatively small group of animals called mustelines, shared by the badger, mongoose, weasel, stoat, mink and others. I faced a continuous barrage of conjectural questions that sprayed all the mustelines but the otter, more random guesses hit on, a baby seal, and, a squirrel. Is that a walrus, mister? Reduced me to giggles, and outside a dog show I heard, a hippo. A beaver, a bear cub, a leopard, one, apparently, that had changed its spots, and a brontosaur. Mi was anything but an otter. But the question for which I awarded the highest score came from a labourer digging a hole in the street. I was still far from him when he laid down his tool, put his hands on his hips, and began to stare. As I drew nearer I saw his expression of surprise and affront, as though he would have me know that he was not one upon whom to play jokes. I came abreast of him. He spat, glared, and then growled out, "Here, mister, what is that?" There was a girl named Valiarmai who was called Vali for short. She was 8 years old and very curious about things. Her favorite pastime was standing in the front doorway of her house, watching what was happening in the street outside. There were no playmates of her own age on her street, and this was about all she had to do. But for Vali, standing at the front door was every bit as enjoyable as any of the elaborate games other children played. Watching the street gave her many new unusual experiences. The most fascinating thing of all was the bus that traveled between her village and the nearest town. It passed through her street each hour, once going to the town and once coming back. The sight of the bus, filled each time with a new set of passengers, was a source of unending joy for Vali. Day after day she watched the bus, and gradually a tiny wish crept into her head and grew there. She wanted to ride on that bus, even if just once. This wish became stronger and stronger, until it was an overwhelming desire. Vali would stare wistfully at the people who got on or off the bus when it stopped at the street corner. Their faces would kindle in her longings, dreams, and hopes. If one of her friends happened to ride the bus and tried to describe the sights of the town to her, Valley would be too jealous to listen and would shout, in English, proud. Proud. Neither she nor her friends really understood the meaning of the word, but they used it often as a slang expression of disapproval. Over many days and months, Valley listened carefully to conversations between her neighbors and people who regularly used the bus, and she also asked a few discreet questions here and there. This way she picked up various small details about the bus journey. The town was 6 miles from her village. The fare was 30 paise one way, which is almost nothing at all, she heard one well-dressed man say, but to Valley, who scarcely saw that much money from one month to the next, it seemed a fortune. The trip to the town took 45 minutes. On reaching town, if she stayed in her seat and paid another 30 paise, she could return home on the same bus. This meant that she could take the 1 o'clock afternoon bus, reach the town at 1:45, and be back home by about 2:45. On and on went her thoughts as she calculated and recalculated, planned and replanned. Well, one fine spring day the afternoon bus was just on the point of leaving the village and turning into the main highway when a small voice was heard shouting, "Stop the bus! Stop the bus!" and a tiny hand was raised commandingly. The bus slowed down to a crawl, and the conductor, sticking his head out the door, said, "Hurry then. Tell whoever it is to come quickly." "It's me," shouted Valley. "I'm the one who has to get on." By now the bus had come to a stop, and the conductor said, "Oh, really? You don't say so." "Yes, I simply have to go to town," said Valley, still standing outside the bus, "and here's my money." She showed him some coins. Okay, but first you must get on the bus," said the conductor, and he stretched out a hand to help her up. "Never mind," she said, "I can get on by myself. You don't have to help me." The conductor was a jolly sort, fond of joking. "Oh, please don't be angry with me, my fine madam," he said. "Here, have a seat right up there in front. Everybody move aside please. Make way for madam." It was the slack time of day, and there were only 6 or 7 passengers on the bus. They were all looking at Valley and laughing with the conductor. Valley was overcome with shyness. Avoiding everyone's eyes, she walked quickly to an empty seat and sat down. "May we start now, madam?" the conductor asked, smiling. Then he blew his whistle twice, and the bus moved forward with a roar. It was a new bus, its outside painted a gleaming white with some green stripes along the sides. Inside, the overhead bars shone like silver. Directly in front of Valley, above the windshield, there was a beautiful clock. The seats were soft and luxurious. Valley devoured everything with her eyes. But when she started to look outside, she found her view cut off by a canvas blind that covered the lower part of her window. So she stood up on the seat and peered over the blind. The bus was now going along the bank of a canal. The road was very narrow. On one side there was the canal and, beyond it, palm trees, grassland, distant mountains, and the blue sky. On the other side was a deep ditch and then acres and acres of green fields, green, as far as the eye could see. Oh, it was all so wonderful. Suddenly she was startled by a voice. "Listen, child," said the voice, "you shouldn't stand like that. Sit down." Sitting down, she looked to see who had spoken. It was an elderly man who had honestly been concerned for her, but she was annoyed by his attention. "There's nobody here who's a child," she said haughtily. "I've paid my 30 paise like everyone else," the conductor chimed in. "Oh, sir, but this is a very grown-up madam. Do you think a mere girl could pay her own fare and travel to the city all alone?" Valley shot an angry glance at the conductor and said, "I am not a madam. Please remember that, and you've not yet given me my ticket." "I'll remember," the conductor said, mimicking her tone. Everyone laughed, and gradually Valley too joined in the laughter. The conductor punched a ticket and handed it to her. "Just sit back and make yourself comfortable. Why should you stand when you've paid for a seat?" "Because I want to," she answered, standing up again. "But if you stand on the seat, you may fall and hurt yourself when the bus makes a sharp turn or hits a bump. That's why we want you to sit down, child." "I'm not a child, I tell you," she said irritably. "I'm 8 years old." Of course. How stupid of me. 8 years. The bus stopped, some new passengers got on, and the conductor got busy for a time. Afraid of losing her seat, Valley finally sat down. An elderly woman came and sat beside her. "Are you all alone, dear?" she asked Valley as the bus started again. Valley found the woman absolutely repulsive, such big holes she had in her earlobes, and such ugly earrings in them. And she could smell the beetle nut the woman was chewing and see the beetle juice that was threatening to spill over her lips at any moment. Ugh! Who could be sociable with such a person? "Yes, I'm traveling alone," she answered curtly. "And I've got a ticket too." "Yes, she's on her way to town," said the conductor. "With a 30 paise ticket." "Oh, why don't you mind your own business," said Valley. But she laughed all the same, and the conductor laughed too. But the old woman went on with her drivel. "Is it proper for such a young person to travel alone? Do you know exactly where you're going in town? What's the street? What's the house number? You needn't bother about me. I can take care of myself," Valley said, turning her face towards the window and staring out. Her first journey, what careful, painstaking, elaborate plans she had had to make for it. She had thriftily saved whatever stray coins came her way, resisting every temptation to buy peppermints, toys, balloons, and the like, and finally she had saved a total of 60 paise. How difficult it had been, particularly that day at the village fair, but she had resolutely stifled a strong desire to ride the merry-go-round, even though she had the money. After she had enough money saved, her next problem was how to slip out of the house without her mother's knowledge. But she managed this without too much difficulty. Every day after lunch her mother would nap from about 1 to 4 or so. Valley always used these hours for her excursions, as she stood looking from the doorway of her house or sometimes even ventured out into the village. Today, these same hours could be used for her first excursion outside the village. The bus rolled on, now cutting across a bare landscape, now rushing through a tiny hamlet or past an odd wayside shop. Sometimes the bus seemed on the point of gobbling up another vehicle that was coming towards them or a pedestrian crossing the road. But lo, somehow it passed on smoothly, leaving all obstacles safely behind. Trees came running towards them but then stopped as the bus reached them and simply stood there helpless for a moment by the side of the road before rushing away in the other direction. Suddenly Valley clapped her hands with glee. A young cow, tail high in the air, was running very fast, right in the middle of the road, right in front of the bus. The bus slowed to a crawl, and the driver sounded his horn loudly again and again. But the more he honked, the more frightened the animal became and the faster it galloped, always right in front of the bus. Somehow this was very funny to Valley. She laughed and laughed until there were tears in her eyes. "Hey, lady, haven't you laughed enough?" called the conductor. "Better save some for tomorrow." At last the cow moved off the road. And soon the bus came to a railroad crossing. A speck of a train could be seen in the distance, growing bigger and bigger as it drew near. Then it rushed past the crossing gate with a tremendous roar and rattle, shaking the bus. Then the bus went on and passed the train station. From there it traversed a busy, well-laid-out shopping street and, turning, entered a wider thoroughfare. Such big, bright-looking shops. What glittering displays of clothes and other merchandise. Such big crowds. Struck dumb with wonder, Valley gaped at everything. Then the bus stopped and everyone got off except Valley. "Hey, lady," said the conductor, "aren't you ready to get off? This is as far as your 30 paise takes you." "No," Valley said, "I'm going back on this same bus." She took another 30 paise from her pocket and handed the coins to the conductor. "Why, is something the matter?" "No, nothing's the matter. I just felt like having a bus ride, that's all. Don't you want to have a look at the sights, now that you're here?" "All by myself? Oh, I'd be much too afraid." Greatly amused by the girl's way of speaking, the conductor said, "But you weren't afraid to come in the bus." "Nothing to be afraid of about that," she answered. "Well, then, why not go to that stall over there and have something to drink?" "Nothing to be afraid of about that either." "Oh, no, I couldn't do that." "Well, then, let me bring you a cold drink. Won't your mother be looking for you?" the conductor asked when he gave the girl her ticket. "No, no one will be looking for me," she said. The bus started, and again there were the same wonderful sights. Valley wasn't bored in the slightest and greeted everything with the same excitement she'd felt the first time. But suddenly she saw a young cow lying dead by the roadside, just where it had been struck by some fast-moving vehicle. "Isn't that the same cow that ran in front of the bus on our trip to town?" she asked the conductor. The conductor nodded, and she was overcome with sadness. What had been a lovable, beautiful creature just a little while ago had now suddenly lost its charm and its life and looked so horrible, so frightening as it lay there, legs spread-eagled, a fixed stare in its lifeless eyes, blood all over. The bus moved on. The memory of the dead cow haunted her, dampening her enthusiasm. She no longer wanted to look out the window. She sat thus, glued to her seat, until the bus reached her village at 3:40. She stood up and stretched herself. Then she turned to the conductor and said, "Well, sir, one hoped to see you again." "Okay, madam," he answered her, smiling. "Whenever you feel like a bus ride, come and join us. And don't forget to bring your fare." She laughed and jumped down from the bus. Then away she went, running straight for home. When she entered her house, she found her mother awake and talking to one of Valley's aunts, the one from South Street. This aunt was a real chatterbox, never closing her mouth once she started talking. "And where have you been?" said her aunt when Valley came in. She spoke very casually, not expecting a reply. So Valley just smiled, and her mother and aunt went on with their conversation. "Yes, you're right," her mother said. "So many things in our midst and in the world outside. How can we possibly know about everything? And even when we do know about something, we often can't understand it completely, can we?" "Oh, yes," breathed Valley. "What?" asked her mother. "What's that you say?" "Oh," said Valley, "I was just agreeing with what you said about things happening without our knowledge. Just a chit of a girl, she is," said her aunt, "and yet look how she pokes her nose into our conversation, just as though she were a grown lady." Valley smiled to herself. She didn't want him to understand her smile. Gautama Buddha, 563 BC to 483 BC, began life as a prince named Siddhartha Gautama, in northern India. At 12, he was sent away for schooling in the Hindu sacred scriptures, and 4 years later he returned home to marry a princess. They had a son and lived for 10 years as befitted royalty. At about the age of 25, the prince, heretofore shielded from the sufferings of the world, while out hunting chanced upon a sick man, then an aged man, then a funeral procession, and finally a monk begging for alms. These sights so moved him that he at once went out into the world to seek enlightenment concerning the sorrows he had witnessed. He wandered for 7 years and finally sat down under a peepal tree, where he vowed to stay until enlightenment came. Enlightened after 7 days, he renamed the tree the Bodhi tree, tree of wisdom, and began to teach and to share his new understandings. At that point he became known as the Buddha, the awakened or the enlightened. The Buddha preached his first sermon at the city of Benares, most holy of the dipping places on the river Ganges. That sermon has been preserved and is given here. It reflects the Buddha's wisdom about one inscrutable kind of suffering. Kissa Gautami had an only son, and he died. In her grief she carried the dead child to all her neighbors, asking them for medicine, and the people said, "She has lost her senses. The boy is dead." At length, Kissa Gautami met a man who replied to her request, "I cannot give thee medicine for thy child, but I know a physician who can." And the girl said, "Pray tell me, sir, who is it?" And the man replied, "Go to Sakyamuni, the Buddha." Kissa Gautami repaired to the Buddha and cried, "Lord and Master, give me the medicine that will cure my boy." The Buddha answered, "I want a handful of mustard seed." And when the girl in her joy promised to procure it, the Buddha added, "The mustard seed must be taken from a house where no one has lost a child, husband, parent or friend." Poor Kissa Gautami now went from house to house, and the people pitied her and said, "Here is mustard seed. Take it." But when she asked, "Did a son or daughter, a father or mother, die in your family?" they answered her, "Alas! The living are few, but the dead are many. Do not remind us of our deepest grief." And there was no house but some beloved one had died in it. Kissa Gautami became weary and hopeless, and sat down at the wayside watching the lights of the city, as they flickered up and were extinguished again. At last the darkness of the night reigned everywhere. And she considered the fate of men, that their lives flicker up and are extinguished again. And she thought to herself, "How selfish am I in my grief? Death is common to all. Yet in this valley of desolation there is a path that leads him to immortality who has surrendered all selfishness." The Buddha said, "The life of mortals in this world is troubled and brief and combined with pain. For there is not any means by which those that have been born can avoid dying. After reaching old age there is death. Of such a nature are living beings. As ripe fruits are early in danger of falling, so mortals when born are always in danger of death. As all earthen vessels made by the potter end in being broken, so is the life of mortals. Both young and adult, both those who are fools and those who are wise, all fall into the power of death. All are subject to death. Of those who, overcome by death, depart from life, a father cannot save his son, nor kinsmen their relations. Mark, while relatives are looking on and lamenting deeply, one by one mortals are carried off, like an ox that is led to the slaughter. So the world is afflicted with death and decay, therefore the wise do not grieve, knowing the terms of the world. Not from weeping nor from grieving will anyone obtain peace of mind. On the contrary, his pain will be the greater and his body will suffer. He will make himself sick and pale, yet the dead are not saved by his lamentation. He who seeks peace should draw out the arrow of lamentation, and complaint, and grief. He who has drawn out the arrow and has become composed will obtain peace of mind. He who has overcome all sorrow will become free from sorrow, and be blessed. Introduction. The Proposal is a one-act farce by Anton Chekhov, filled with humor, irony, and satire. The play revolves around the theme of marriage as a social and economic agreement rather than a romantic bond. The story follows Lomov, a nervous young man, who visits his neighbor Chubukov to propose to his daughter Natalia. However, instead of discussing the proposal, they get into ridiculous arguments over land ownership and their dogs, turning a supposed romantic event into a comic misunderstanding. Character list. 1. Stepan Stepanovich Chubukov, a landowner, Natalia's father. 1. He is a cunning and greedy man who wants his daughter to marry Lomov for his wealth. 2. Natalia Stepanovna, a 25-year-old unmarried woman, Chubukov's daughter. 2. She is strong-willed, quarrelsome, and desperate for marriage. 3. Ivan Vasilevich Lomov, a wealthy neighbor, around 35 years old, looking for a wife. 3. He is hypochondriac, always worried about his health, and very argumentative. Scene-wise summary. Opening scene, Lomov's arrival. 1. The play opens with Lomov visiting Chubukov's house, dressed in a formal suit. 2. Chubukov welcomes him warmly but is surprised by the visit. 3. Lomov is extremely nervous and struggling to express his purpose for coming. 4. Finally, after some hesitation, he tells Chubukov that he has come to ask for Natalia's hand in marriage. 5. Chubukov is delighted but pretends to be surprised and overjoyed. 5. He immediately gives his approval. First argument, Oxen Meadows dispute. 1. When Natalia enters, she does not know about the proposal. 2. Lomov starts talking about their family relations and land ownership. 3. Soon, they start arguing over a piece of land called Oxen Meadows. 4. Lomov claims that Oxen Meadows belong to him, but Natalia insists that it belongs to her family. 5. Both become furious, and Chubukov also joins in, siding with Natalia. 6. The heated argument makes Lomov extremely nervous, and his health worsens. 7. Lomov storms out of the house in frustration. Realization and panic. 1. After Lomov leaves, Chubukov accidentally reveals to Natalia that Lomov had actually come to propose to her. 2. Natalia panics and insists that her father must bring Lomov back immediately. 3. She suddenly changes her stance and agrees with everything Lomov had said earlier, proving that she is more interested in marriage than in the argument. Second argument, the dog dispute. 1. Lomov returns, and Natalia, trying to be nice, changes the topic. 2. They start talking about dogs, and a new argument begins. 3. Lomov claims that his dog, Yes, is better than Natalia's dog, Squeezer. 4. Natalia argues that Squeezer is the superior dog. 5. Once again, the argument escalates, and Chubukov joins in. 6. Lomov, already weak and stressed, faints from nervousness. The proposal is made, and almost lost again. 1. Seeing Lomov unconscious, Chubukov and Natalia panic. 2. When Lomov regains consciousness, Chubukov hurriedly forces them to get engaged, saying, "Hurry up and kiss each other." 3. However, even after getting engaged, Lomov and Natalia start arguing again. 4. The play ends on a humorous note, showing that even though they are getting married, their fights will continue. Conclusion: The Proposal is a brilliant satire on marriage, human greed, and petty conflicts. Through Lomov and Natalia's absurd quarrels, Chekhov mocks the way people fight over small matters while ignoring bigger issues. The play highlights how marriages were based more on economic security than on love in 19th century Russia. In the end, even though Lomov and Natalia get engaged, their constant arguments suggest that their married life will be full of fights, adding to the humor of the play.